friend in the world who I went to high school with is one of the producers, Doug Chapin. He sent it to me to read, and I read it when I was staying with a friend up on Mulholland Drive in California, and that friend was away, and I was reading this all by myself on top of a mountain, and it was so frightening. So, of course, I could see it was written so beautifully, Fred Walton and Steve Fecky, that I could see the movie practically. So I said, yes, of course.
Why haven't you checked the children?
I was aware of the fact that it had been done. I did not choose to see it because I'm very impressionable, and if I watch another actor play the part that I'm going to play, it never leaves my brain, and I wanted to make it my own, of course. So I didn't see it, but I heard from Doug how great it was. The music, Dana Kaproff, I think the music, I watched it this morning for the first time in 20 years, and I found it terrifying. And I was really keenly aware of how the music was a big character. It was just stalking. The music was stalking you like a snake all through the thing. Fred Walton, the choices that he made to build the fear and suspense without using any blood or violence, like Hitchcock kind of, well, not like the shower scene, but I was talking to Doug Chapin, who produced it, and he was saying that Fred always had the idea that he wanted to terrify people just enough, but not enough so that they would look away or cover their eyes. He wanted people to be able to keep watching, and he really succeeded with that. Just the littlest things become terrifying in the way he built up the suspense. I mean, I think he's brilliant. His choices are so subtle, and the casting, Colleen Dewhurst, Rachel Roberts, Tony Beckley, who plays the killer, is so beautiful to watch, and his eyes are so vulnerable, and I've never seen a killer like that, a villain in a movie that you also had some small instinct of wishing you could take care of or protect. I've never seen that before, and that's Fred's choice of casting. That's remarkable. The choices of just showing him ultimately just naked and in a fetal position like a baby, a poor, sick, demented baby. It was so unique and so sensitive as a directorial choice for a quote-unquote horror movie. But that doesn't seem to be the main thing about this movie. I mean, it is one of the most terrifying things I've ever seen, but the relationships are important, and the subtleties and the humanity of the characters is very important. The only moment where Tony Beckley and I are actually acting together in a scene is in the very final moments. Charlie had worked with him, and Colleen Dewhurst had worked with him, but I didn't really work with him. And I would say, in hindsight, watching the performance, that fear or vulnerability that he was feeling about not delivering has become an intrinsically important part of that character, because I think that character was that way. And that's what made him such a unique villain, that he had no confidence. He just had needs.
Just give Bobby the number here, okay? Don't tell him I told you.
The character that I was playing had a much more normal existence than I ever had as a teenager or young woman, because I really didn't stay in any one place for a very long time because my father was an architect and was traveling, and I never had that situation of here I am, you know, strolling down the suburban street with my books on my way to baby. I never had that in my life, you know, and So I guess it was interesting just to try and work for a kind of normalcy until things started to get very bizarre. And and then I know that ultimately I think a lot of people related to that thing because a lot of young people babysit, and it is a very, if you think about it, it's a position of extraordinary responsibility. These little kids are in your care, and you're some teenage girl. I always try and work from my own fears and my own thoughts and emotions, and I try and use whatever is in me to fulfill the emotional life of anyone that I play.
I've been 33 years in the business of tracking people down and putting them away. Spent almost a year on Kurt Duncan alone with the trial and the testimonies and the background investigations. Now, I didn't come here today to look in your goddamn folders. In fact, I wouldn't be here at all if you'd done your job right.
First of all, I have to say that I am lucky enough to have made, I think, 5 or 6 movies with Charlie, and I just love him to death. And he's just a true actor. He doesn't make anything up or act ever, and that's what I love. I love to look Charlie in the eye and work with him, and it was a privilege, really, and he's just so great in that part. So again, that was an unusual choice of actor and portrayal by the actor, I think. Another interesting thing about this movie.
Hey, Bert. This report just came in on that guy, Kurt Duncan. Seems he broke out of the nut house about 3 weeks ago.
There's so many subtexts and fascinating interchanges, like when they're in the precinct with Ron O'Neill later, and they're playing poker or whatever, and there's an event taking place where he hears the name of that killer and he's trying to ignore it and concentrate on the card game, and then he finally gives in to, okay, I have to deal with this. And just that little scene was made into, a kind of emotional struggle on his part that made it a great scene. The amazing thing is that he was this giant, superfly, masculine hero, and there he is playing this, early on in the film, a young rookie policeman, and later a very polished and sort of tired policeman and loving father, vulnerable, sensitive father, which is, yes, again, it's just an example of Fred and Steve, how they wrote the characters in very, they were not lazy. They wrote them in really specific, unusual ways.
Hello? Hello?
Have you checked the children?
I think one of the harder scenes for me was when I'm grown up and we're in that restaurant and that call comes again. Because we're in a brightly lit, highly populated space, and yet that same feeling has to come back that happens when I'm in the house alone downstairs, So that was a challenge for me, acting-wise. But in terms of like funny anecdotes or something, I don't really have them because it was a fairly serious procedure shooting this movie. And as you will note when you see it, there's an enormous amount of stillness involved and slowness involved, like as I'm walking through the house and in the kitchen with the ice machine, and so it took a lot of concentration and focus, and being on the phone when you're not really on the phone, and Fred was doing these fascinating shots of going down the cord of the phone so that by the time it gets to the foot, you're afraid of my foot, and things like that. So a lot of stillness takes a lot of concentration. I think it came out better than I could have hoped. And again, my friend Doug Chapin and I, and Fred, when the film opened, the opening night of it in New York City, we took a car, and we went to some of the theaters, and in particular, we went to a giant theater in Times Square, which at that point was not like Times Square today. It was mostly porno theaters, but then there were some of the big theaters there, and we went in and we watched toward the end of the movie, and when the big scare happens, just the whole audience practically leapt out of their seats together and screamed, and it was very, exciting, because you realize, well, yeah, we got him, and we got him in a way that I think Fred's part is very artistic, because there's no guts and gore. There's one flashback scene where you see a little blood, but you don't see anything about where it's coming from. It's on Tony Beckley's character, and that's it for the whole movie, basically. I think it's pretty amazing, I did also research with Doug yesterday how much it cost, and he said it cost about $1.5 million, and I think it made around $22 million. We're talking 1979 money, so it was extremely successful, and also it was well reviewed. It was well thought of. Janet Maslin and people like that, Kenneth Tynan, they saw what was special about it. So it was a very gratifying, lucky experience for me. I try and think of the work as the reward of it, the process. In fact, the older I get, I realize that pretty much the process is everything, because there's just absolutely no telling what will ultimately happen with the work once you cut it loose and put it out there. And it's wonderful to get good reviews, but that they don't, in my case, they don't magically lead to something else.
Leave me alone! Jill, this is Sergeant Sacker. Listen to me. We've traced the call. It's coming from inside the house.
Closer to having done the film, people would frequently say to me, have you checked the children, and things like that. So I know that really got into the psyche. There was folklore or fact, I don't know which it was, that was a situation that had actually happened at some point, and that, or had happened multiple times, where something happened when the babysitter was there. I don't know if that is a fact or not a fact, or if it's just one of those things of life imitating art, or who knows what came first. But it did definitely penetrate the psyche. Well, it's a horrible fear, that you're trapped in a place with a madman,
Carol Kane, Charles Durning. When a stranger calls back.
I know how I got involved, because it was the same as the first one. Doug called up and said, we have a new Stranger movie, do you want to do it? And we've got Charlie and everything. But I know that Fred Walton, who was the writer-director of the first one, along with Steve Fecky, I know that he got a concept all those years later of how to fast forward into the lives of Jill and Charlie, and there being someone else out there that was that threatening. And so he got a concept, and he talked to Doug, and they, went and got money for it, and we were lucky enough to go make that. And I think it's really interesting what he did with my character specifically, because my character becomes very tough and teaches women how to defend themselves, and is she's really, her life has been profoundly impacted by what happened to her, and her desire for that not to happen to any other woman. And I think that was, just great, a great idea on Fred's part, and the fact that I could defend myself. The main thing that strikes me about this movie is how much people cared about what they did in every department. The specificity and the unusual choices made and the artistry involved, where I think you could get away with much less. Just have the basic story and it would be spooky and blah, 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 but I think there was a real attempt in all departments to make it as real and specific and in some ways very beautiful. And actors of the caliber of Colleen Dewhurst and Tony Beckley, Charlie Durning, it's just, I think that I really respect what the creatives put together there. I really, in seeing it now, recently, I realized the degree of artistry involved.
Every time they show that exterior of Torchy's, the bar, it made me wish it was a real place. I'd love to go to Torchy's.
I know, I'd like to go to Torchy's. Will you call me if you find it?
I will do that.
Thank you. But I hope nobody will come up to me at the bar and try and...
I mean, there's significant evidence that they might, based
significant, based on when a stranger calls. Yeah.